Hey guys, tonight we begin with something that might shatter every romantic notion you've ever had about the past. We're diving deep into the Dark Ages, also known as the early medieval period, roughly spanning from 500 to 1000 AD. And I'm here to tell you something that might surprise you. If you were suddenly transported back to this time, you probably wouldn't make it through a single day. Forget the knights in shining armor. Forget the grand castles and noble quests. The reality of the Dark Ages was far darker than any Hollywood movie could ever capture. It was a world of unimaginable filth, constant danger, widespread disease, and a brutality that would break even the toughest modern person within hours. So before you get too comfortable in your clean bed with your climate-controlled room, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We're going to walk through a hypothetical 24 hours in the Dark Ages, hour by hour, and I promise you, by the end of this, you'll never take modern life for granted again. Picture this. It's the year 750 AD. You've just woken up somewhere in what we now call England or France. The Roman Empire has fallen. The great libraries have been burned. Most of the knowledge of the ancient world has been lost. You're now living in what historians would later call one of the darkest periods in human history. And your 24-hour nightmare is about to begin. Before we start, let me paint you a picture of what the world looks like in 750 AD. The grand Roman cities have crumbled. Those magnificent aqueducts that once brought clean water to millions collapsed or abandoned. The paved roads that connected an empire, overgrown and broken. The public baths, the forums, the libraries, the theaters, all gone or repurposed into crude fortifications. In their place, you have small, scattered villages of wooden huts. Towns are rare and small. Cities, as we understand them, barely exist. The population of Europe has plummeted from its Roman heights. Literacy has collapsed. Maybe 1% of people can read, and most of those are clergy. Trade has withered to a fraction of what it once was. This is truly a dark age, not just metaphorically, but literally. At night, there are no streetlights, no house lights visible from a distance. Villages are pools of darkness separated by vast stretches of forest and wilderness. When the sun sets, the world disappears into a blackness that modern people can barely imagine. And you're about to experience it all, hour by hour, starting with the moment you open your eyes. Hour 1, waking up, 6 a.m., the horror of medieval sleep. Let's start with the moment you open your eyes. In our modern world, you probably woke up on a comfortable mattress, maybe with memory foam, definitely with clean sheets that were washed recently. You might have groggily reached for your phone to check the time, squinted at the light coming through your curtains, and contemplated hitting the snooze button. None of that exists in the Dark Ages. You're lying on what can barely be called a bed. If you're a peasant, and statistically you almost certainly are, since about 90% of the population works the land, your mattress is a sack stuffed with straw. Not fresh, comfortable straw, like you might imagine from a romantic painting. We're talking about straw that's been compressed, broken down, and is now home to an entire ecosystem of insects, mites, and possibly rodents. The straw is damp. It's always damp. Your dwelling has no proper roof, just thatch that leaks whenever it rains, which in Northern Europe is frequently. The moisture has seeped into everything you own, creating a perpetual state of cold, clammy discomfort that you never fully escape. Mold grows in the corners of your dwelling, black and spreading, releasing spores that you breathe in with every breath. This causes chronic respiratory problems, but you don't know that. You just know that everyone coughs, everyone wheezes, and everyone accepts this as normal. But the dampness is the least of your problems. You're not alone in this bed. Even if you're sleeping solo by choice, you're sharing your sleeping space with fleas, lice, and bedbugs. These aren't occasional visitors. They're permanent residents. Medieval people accepted parasites as an unavoidable fact of life, the same way we accept dust. They didn't have the concept of a pest-free environment. Parasites were just part of existence, like rain or hunger. Fleas were so common that medieval people had special flea traps, pieces of sticky fabric or fur that would attract the insects. Some people would place these traps near their beds and check them in the morning, seeing dozens or even hundreds of fleas caught in the sticky substance. Noble women would sometimes carry small dogs specifically to attract fleas away from themselves, using the animal as a kind of living flea magnet. But you're not nobility. You're just covered in bites, some of them infected, all of them itchy, creating a constant background discomfort that you've learned to ignore because there's no alternative. The room you're in, if you can call it a room, is shared with your entire family. Privacy is a concept that won't be invented for several more centuries. Your parents, siblings, possibly grandparents, and even some livestock are all crammed into this single space. The average peasant dwelling is maybe 15 feet by 20 feet. A single room with a dirt floor and walls made of wattle and daub, woven sticks, covered with a mixture of mud, clay, straw, and animal dung. Yes, livestock. Animals were brought inside at night for two reasons: to protect them from theft and predators, and because their body heat helped warm the dwelling during cold months. So you're sharing your sleeping quarters with chickens, possibly a goat, maybe a pig, if your family is relatively well off. These animals aren't in a separate pen or stall. They're just loose in the room, wandering around, defecating wherever they please. The smell is overwhelming. It's a combination of unwashed human bodies. Bathing is extremely rare, as we'll discuss shortly. Animal waste, rotting thatch, smoke from the fire that's been smoldering all night, and the general mustiness of damp organic matter decomposing slowly in the darkness. This isn't just unpleasant, it's a health hazard. The ammonia from animal urine causes eye irritation and respiratory problems. The smoke from the fire, which has no proper chimney to vent it, causes chronic lung disease. The damp and mold cause respiratory infections. But you don't know any of this. You just know that breathing is sometimes difficult. Your eyes often water, and your chest feels tight. Your eyes adjust to the gloom. There are no windows, or if there are, they're just holes in the wall, maybe covered with oiled cloth if you're lucky. Glass windows are a luxury that won't be common for centuries. The only light comes from the fading embers of last night's fire, casting dancing shadows on the rough walls and creating an eerie, cave-like atmosphere. You're already uncomfortable, itchy, and probably coughing from the smoke that's accumulated overnight. And you haven't even gotten out of bed yet. But here's the thing that would really get you. You're expected to be grateful for this. Having a roof over your head, even one that leaks, having straw to sleep on, even if it's infested, these are privileges. Many people have even less. There are landless peasants who sleep in barns or under hedgerows, exposed to the elements. There are beggars in towns who sleep in doorways or under bridges. Your miserable accommodation is actually better than what many people have. As you sit up, your body aches in ways that modern people rarely experience. The bed provided no support, and you're already developing the chronic back problems that plague most medieval people by their 20s. Your joints are stiff from the cold and damp. Medieval people suffer from arthritis at much younger ages than we do. partly due to the damp living conditions, partly due to the hard physical labor, and partly due to poor nutrition that weakens bones and joints. You're probably already malnourished, which means your bones aren't as strong as they should be. Vitamin D deficiency from lack of sunlight and poor diet leads to rickets in children and osteomalacia in adults. Your bones are soft, prone to deformation and fracture. This makes the physical labor you'll be doing today even more dangerous. You look around at your family members waking up. Everyone looks older than their years. Your parents, probably in their early 30s, look like they're in their 50s by modern standards. Hard labor, poor nutrition, constant illness, and chronic stress age people rapidly in this era. There's no such thing as aging gracefully. In the Dark Ages, people just age, harshly and quickly. If you're a woman, you're looking at a day of back-breaking labor ahead. If you're a man, the same. Children start working as soon as they're physically able, usually around age 5 or 6. There's no childhood as we understand it, just a brief period of being a small, less capable worker. Children aren't sheltered or protected. They're economic assets, additional labor to help the family survive. As you finally stand up, your bare feet touching the cold, damp dirt floor, you realize something else. You desperately need to use the bathroom. And that's when your first full hour in the Dark Ages is about to get significantly worse. But before we get to that, take a moment to consider what you've already experienced. You've been awake for maybe 10 minutes, and you're already more uncomfortable than you've probably been in years of modern life. You're cold and itchy, hungry, and in pain. The smell is nauseating. The living conditions are worse than any camping trip you've ever been on. And this is just the beginning. This is the baseline of medieval existence, the standard condition that people accept as normal because they've never known anything else. Hour 2, morning necessities, 7 a.m., hygiene that will haunt you. Let's talk about what happens when nature calls in the Dark Ages. Brace yourself, because this is where things get genuinely disturbing, even by the low standards we've already established. There is no bathroom. There is no toilet. There isn't even an outhouse in most cases. What you have, if you're lucky, is a bucket. This bucket is shared by the entire household, and it gets emptied, eventually, maybe once a day, maybe less frequently, depending on how ambitious someone is feeling and how full the bucket gets. The bucket is in the corner of your dwelling, and there's no privacy. Remember, privacy doesn't exist yet. Individual privacy is a modern concept that would be incomprehensible to medieval people. You do your business while your family goes about their morning routine, preparing for the day, tending the fire, dealing with animals. Modesty is a luxury no one can afford. Everyone sees everyone else in all states of undress and in all bodily functions. But here's where it gets worse. What happens to the contents of that bucket? In rural areas, it might be used as fertilizer, which actually makes some sense from an agricultural perspective. Human waste does have nutritional value for plants, though using it raw without composting creates health hazards that medieval people don't understand. But at least in rural areas, the waste is going somewhere purposeful. In towns and early cities, where most people are concentrated in close quarters, the contents of chamber pots are simply thrown into the street. Sometimes people shout a warning. Gardelou, in Scotland, derived from the French garde l'eau, watch out for the water, which is darkly ironic since it's definitely not water. But often, they don't bother with a warning. You just open your window or door and hurl the contents out, hoping no one is passing by at that exact moment. Medieval streets are essentially open sewers. Human waste, animal waste, food scraps, dead animals, blood and offal from butchers, and various other disgusting materials accumulate in the thoroughfares. When it rains, this creates a toxic soup that can flood into ground floor dwellings, bringing all manner of filth and disease into people's homes. When it's dry, the waste dries into a noxious dust that gets kicked up with every footstep, creating clouds of fecal particles that people breathe in constantly. The smell is indescribable. Imagine the worst public restroom you've ever encountered. Multiply that by 1,000. Add in the smell of rotting organic matter, dead animals decomposing in ditches, and the general funk of unwashed humanity, and you're getting close to what a medieval street smelled like. Your nose would never adjust. The stench would be a constant, overwhelming presence that permeates everything. Your clothes, your hair, your home, your food. Now, let's talk about personal hygiene, or rather, the almost complete lack of it. Bathing is rare, very rare. The ancient Romans had a sophisticated bathing culture with public baths, heated water, and even soap-like cleansing agents. They understood, at least intuitively, that cleanliness contributed to health. But all of that infrastructure has crumbled or been abandoned. The public baths have fallen into ruin. The aqueducts that supplied them with water have been destroyed or have collapsed from lack of maintenance. More than that, the early Christian church is deeply suspicious of bathing. Church authorities view excessive attention to the body as sinful and potentially immodest. They associate Roman bathing culture with the pagan past and with sexual licentiousness. Some extreme religious figures even wear the fact that they never bathe as a badge of spiritual devotion. Saint Anthony, one of the Desert Fathers, reportedly never bathed in his entire adult life and considered it a mark of holiness. So bathing has become not just impractical, but morally suspect. Some medieval people might bathe a few times a year, perhaps before major religious holidays like Easter or Christmas. But the majority go months or even years without a full bath. Instead, they might occasionally wash their hands and face, if water is available and if they think about it. You haven't washed in weeks, possibly months. Your skin is covered with a layer of grime, sweat, and dead skin cells that has built up into a visible coating. If you were to scrape your skin with a fingernail, you'd remove a dark, greasy substance that's part dirt, part body oils, part dead skin. Your hair is greasy, matted, and full of lice. The lice are so numerous that you can see them moving if you look closely at anyone's head. Lice are so common that picking nits from each other's hair is a normal social activity, like how primates groom each other. Families sit together in the evening, picking lice and nits out of each other's hair and crushing them between their fingernails. The characteristic pop sound when a louse is crushed is familiar to everyone. This isn't considered disgusting or shameful. It's just part of daily life, like combing your hair is for us. Your teeth are another disaster. There are no toothbrushes, no toothpaste, and certainly no dentists as we would understand them. The concept of preventive dental care doesn't exist. Some people might chew on twigs to clean their teeth somewhat. Certain types of wood have mild abrasive or antiseptic properties. But dental hygiene is essentially non-existent for most people. By your mid-20s, you'll probably have significant tooth decay, painful cavities, and quite possibly gum disease. The medieval diet, heavy in coarse bread and acidic foods, is hard on teeth. The bread contains grit from the stone mills used to grind the grain, and this grit literally wears down tooth enamel over time. Many people lose multiple teeth by their 30s. The pain from dental problems is constant for many people, a dull ache that occasionally flares into agonizing toothaches that can last for days or weeks. And there's no real treatment except extraction, performed without anesthesia, usually by a barber or blacksmith with a pair of pliers. The procedure is exactly as horrifying as it sounds. The patient is held down by several strong men while the tooth is yanked out, often breaking into pieces that have to be dug out of the gum individually. The screaming is something witnesses never forget. The extraction site, frequently becomes infected, and that infection can spread to the jaw and then to the brain, causing death from what started as a simple toothache. Your breath is terrible. Everyone's breath is terrible. Combination of decaying teeth, gum disease, poor digestion from the inadequate diet, and the lack of any oral hygiene creates a halitosis that would be shocking to modern people. But everyone smells equally bad, so no one really notices. Bad breath is just another normal feature of medieval life. Your clothes present another hygiene problem. You probably own one, maybe two sets of clothing. They're made of rough wool or linen. They're itchy against your skin, and they're never washed. Doing laundry is an incredibly labor-intensive process that requires hauling water from a well or stream, possibly hundreds of gallons for a family's washing, heating it over a fire, beating the clothes to loosen dirt, scrubbing them with harsh lye soap, if you can afford it, or just with water if you can't, and then drying them, which in the damp Northern European climate can take days. Given the amount of work involved, most families wash clothes perhaps a few times a year, if that. So your clothes are stiff with dirt, sweat, food stains, and who knows what else. They're also home to more parasites. Lice live in the seams of your clothing, and you can see them moving if you look closely. Body lice are slightly different from head lice. They live in clothing and move onto your skin to feed. This is just normal. Everyone has lice. It's not considered shameful or disgusting. It's just life. Your fingernails are black with ingrained dirt that never fully comes out. Your feet are calloused, cracked, and probably infected in places. Most peasants go barefoot much of the time, or wear simple leather shoes that provide minimal protection. Your feet are constantly exposed to filth, sharp objects, and the general contamination of medieval streets. If you have any cuts or scrapes, and you definitely do, given the harsh living conditions, they're at high risk for infection. Even minor injuries can become life-threatening in an era without antibiotics or even basic understanding of wound care. Speaking of infections, let's talk about disease. Medieval people are constantly sick with something. Intestinal parasites are universal. Roundworms, tapeworms, and other parasites are so common that passing them is just part of normal life. People routinely defecate worms, sometimes worms that are many feet long, and this is accepted as a normal bodily function. Diarrhea is frequent, caused by contaminated water and food, parasites, and general poor nutrition. Skin diseases, respiratory infections, and fevers are constant companions. And here's the terrifying part. You have no idea what causes any of this. Germ theory won't be discovered for another 1,000 years. Medieval people believe diseases are caused by bad air. Miasma theory, imbalances in bodily humors, the idea that health depends on the balance of blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, or divine punishment for sins. When you get sick, people assume you've done something to anger God, or that you've been exposed to corrupted air, or that your humors are out of balance. So when you inevitably get sick, and you will, probably within your first few hours in this time period, there's no understanding of what's happening or how to treat it effectively. Medical treatment is more likely to kill you than cure you, as we'll discuss later when we talk about medieval medicine. As you finish your morning necessities and step outside your dwelling to empty the chamber pot into the street ditch, you're already exhausted, uncomfortable, and probably feeling ill. The sun is barely up, and you've already experienced more physical discomfort than most modern people encounter in a month. And your day has barely begun. You haven't even had breakfast yet. Hour 3, breakfast, 8 a.m., the meal that might kill you. It's time for breakfast, and if you've been feeling queasy from the lack of hygiene, the smell, and the general squalor, you're about to feel even worse. Medieval breakfast. If there even is such a thing as a dedicated breakfast meal, which varies by region and social class, is not the hearty, nutritious start to the day that modern nutritionists recommend. For most people, it's whatever was left over from yesterday, reheated over the fire, or sometimes just cold bread and weak beer. The staple food for peasants is pottage, a thick stew that's been simmering in the same pot for days, sometimes weeks. Think of it as a perpetual stew. New ingredients are added periodically. A few vegetables, some grain, water. But the pot is rarely emptied and cleaned. This creates a perpetual stew that develops layers of flavor, some good, many questionable, and a bacterial culture that would horrify modern food safety inspectors. Today's pottage contains some barley or oats, maybe a few vegetables like onions, turnips, or leeks if the season is right, and water from the local well or stream. The water itself is probably contaminated with all sorts of bacteria and parasites. Wells are often shallow and located too close to latrines or animal pens, allowing contamination to seep through the soil. Streams are used for everything: drinking water, washing, rare as that is, disposing of waste, watering animals. Upstream, someone might be dumping their chamber pot. Downstream, that's your drinking water. Boiling the water in the pottage at least kills some of the pathogens, making it safer than drinking water straight from the source. But it doesn't eliminate everything. Bacterial spores, certain parasites, and chemical contaminants aren't destroyed by boiling. You're still ingesting a host of potential disease agents with every meal. There's no meat in your breakfast. Meat is incredibly expensive and reserved for rare occasions. The wealthy eat meat regularly, sometimes multiple times a day, but you're not wealthy. You might taste meat a few times a year during major festivals like Christmas or Easter, or perhaps after a successful hunt, if someone in the village manages to poach some game without getting caught. Instead, you're eating a gray, lumpy mixture that's barely flavored. Salt is expensive, a valuable commodity that's heavily taxed and sometimes used as currency. Spices are rare and costly luxuries that only the rich can afford. Pepper, cinnamon, cloves, and other spices are imported from distant lands and are literally worth more weight in silver. Your food is bland, monotonous, and just barely adequate to keep you alive. The bread that accompanies your pottage is another story entirely. It's made from coarse flour ground between stones at the Lord's mill, which you're required to use, paying a fee for the privilege. The flour is often contaminated with grit from the grinding stones themselves. This grit is hard, abrasive, and literally wears down your teeth over time, contributing to the dental problems that plague medieval people. If you live to old age, your teeth might be worn down almost to the gum line from decades of eating this bread. The grain used to make the flour might also be contaminated with ergot, a fungus that grows on rye and other grains, particularly in wet years when conditions favor its growth. Ergot contains psychoactive compounds similar to LSD, as well as toxic alkaloids that cause severe illness. Mild ergot poisoning causes hallucinations, convulsions, and a burning sensation in the limbs, hence its medieval name, St. Anthony's fire. The burning sensation is caused by ergot's effect on blood vessels, constricting them and reducing blood flow to the extremities. Severe poisoning can cause gangrene, leading to the loss of fingers, toes, or entire limbs. In the worst cases, gangrenous limbs would turn black and literally fall off, leaving the victim permanently maimed if they survived at all. Major ergot outbreaks occurred throughout the Dark Ages and medieval period, killing thousands and causing mass hallucinations that may have contributed to reports of demonic possessions, visions of demons and monsters. Dancing plagues, where groups of people would dance uncontrollably for days, and other bizarre phenomena that medieval chroniclers struggled to explain. What they were witnessing was mass poisoning from contaminated grain. So every bite of bread you take is potentially Russian roulette. Is this batch contaminated? You won't know until symptoms start appearing, if they do. Most of the time you're lucky and the bread is just unpleasant, not poisonous. But the risk is always there. The beer that everyone drinks with breakfast, yes, even children, is at least safer than the water, since the brewing process involves boiling. But it's not the beer you're thinking of. Medieval ale is weak, sour, cloudy with sediment, and often barely alcoholic. It's more like liquid bread than the beer we know today, which makes sense since both are made from fermented grain. This small beer or table beer typically has an alcohol content of 1–2%, just enough to provide some antibacterial effect and make the water safer to drink, but not enough to get you drunk unless you drink massive quantities. You drink it because you have to stay hydrated, and unboiled water will likely give you dysentery, cholera, typhoid, or one of many other waterborne diseases that kill millions of people in this era. As you eat your meager breakfast, you're surrounded by flies. They're everywhere, landing on your food, your face, your hands. They've just come from the waste in the street, the dead animal rotting in the ditch, the open wound on your neighbor's leg, the animal carcasses at the butcher's shop. They're vectors for disease, spreading bacteria and parasites with every landing, but you have no way to know this. You just try to wave them away ineffectually and keep eating. Your wooden bowl has never been properly cleaned. It's been wiped out with a dirty rag, maybe rinsed with cold water, but never sanitized in any meaningful way. Bacteria colonies are thriving in the grain of the wood, in the small cracks and crevices. Every meal you eat from this bowl is reintroducing pathogens into your system, contributing to the chronic low-level illness that's a constant feature of medieval life. The spoon you're using is shared by the whole family. It's probably made of wood or, if your family has any wealth at all, pewter, which is a soft metal alloy containing lead. That's right, lead poisoning is a risk even for those who can afford slightly better utensils. Like the bowl, the spoon is never properly cleaned. The medieval understanding of cleanliness is radically different from ours. Visible dirt is bad and should be wiped away, but the invisible world of microorganisms is completely unknown. If something looks clean, it is clean, as far as medieval people are concerned. As you finish your pottage and bread, washing it down with sour, cloudy beer, you're still hungry. You will remain hungry for most of your life. Malnutrition is the default state for peasants in the Dark Ages. You're not getting enough calories, probably somewhere between 1200 and 1500 per day, when you need closer to 2,500, 3,000, given the physical labor you'll be doing. You're not getting enough protein. Meat is rare. And while beans and grains provide some protein, it's not complete protein with all the amino acids your body needs. And you're definitely not getting a balanced diet with adequate vitamins and minerals. This chronic malnutrition has devastating effects. Your immune system is compromised, making you vulnerable to every disease that comes along. Your bones are weak. Rickets in children and osteomalacia in adults are extremely common, caused by vitamin D deficiency and poor calcium absorption. Your muscles don't develop properly. Wounds heal slowly because your body doesn't have the nutrients it needs for tissue repair. Pregnant women and young children suffer the most, with mortality rates that would be considered catastrophic by modern standards. Looking around at your family as breakfast concludes, you notice that everyone seems small by modern standards. Medieval people were significantly shorter than we are today, primarily due to poor nutrition during childhood and adolescence. The average medieval man stood around 5'6" to 5'7", compared to 5'9" to 5'10" for modern men in developed countries. And that's if he was relatively well fed. Most peasants were even shorter, with men averaging closer to 5'4" and women around 5'0". This isn't just genetic. Studies of skeletal remains show that medieval people had the genetic potential for greater height, but malnutrition during their growth years stunted their development. When these same genetic populations are well fed in modern times, they grow much taller, proving that medieval height was primarily determined by nutrition, not genetics. People also look prematurely aged. Hard physical labor, constant illness, malnutrition, exposure to the elements, and chronic stress take a brutal toll. Someone in their 30s looks like they're in their 50s by modern standards. Someone in their 50s, if they've managed to survive that long, looks ancient, bent, wrinkled, missing teeth, moving slowly and painfully. But there's no time to sit around feeling sorry for yourself. The sun is well up now, and work must begin. If you don't work, you don't eat. It's that simple. And in the dark ages, not eating means dying quite quickly. Your body has no reserves to draw on. You're already malnourished. Missing even a few meals could push you from chronic hunger into acute starvation. Hour 4, going to work, 9 a.m., the feudal trap. Welcome to the feudal system, one of the most oppressive social structures ever devised by human civilization. Let me explain exactly how trapped you are, because modern people often don't fully understand just how thoroughly the feudal system controlled every aspect of a peasant's life. You are a serf. This is not quite slavery, but it's close enough that the distinction doesn't bring much comfort. The main difference is that serfs can't be bought and sold as individuals the way slaves can. But in almost every other way, your situation is comparable to slavery. You are legally bound to the land owned by your lord, a noble who has control over vast territories granted to him by the king or a higher-ranking noble. This land isn't just his property. You are part of that property. When the land changes hands through inheritance or sale, you come with it, like furniture or livestock. You cannot leave this land without your lord's permission, which will almost never be granted. If you try to run away, you're a fugitive. If you're caught, and you probably will be, since a stranger in a medieval village is immediately obvious and suspicious, you'll be punished severely. Common punishments for runaways include branding, having an ear cut off or nailed to a post, flogging, or being placed in the stocks for days while the villagers throw rotting vegetables, stones, or worse at you. You cannot marry without your lord's permission. Marriage requires the lord's consent and usually involves paying a fee called a merchant. The lord has to approve your choice of spouse, and he'll only do so if it serves his interests. Sometimes lords exercise droit du seigneur, the supposed right to sleep with a serf's bride on her wedding night, though historians debate how commonly this actually occurred versus how often it was threatened or used as leverage. You cannot even mill your grain at a different mill. You must use your lord's mill and pay him for the privilege. Same with baking bread in the lord's oven, pressing grapes or apples in the lord's press, and using the lord's blacksmith. These are called banalités, monopolies that the lord holds over essential services, and they're a significant source of income for him and a significant drain on your already minimal resources. In exchange for being allowed to live on the land and farm a small plot for your own subsistence, you owe your lord labor. Typically, this means working his fields for 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, for example. But it can be more during critical periods like planting or harvest. During harvest, you might be required to work 6 days a week on the lord's land, leaving you only Sunday for your own plot, and Sunday is supposed to be devoted to rest and church attendance. The remaining days, you can work your own small plot, except for Sundays, which are reserved for church. Missing Sunday Mass is a sin that can result in public penance, fines, or other punishments. So effectively, you might have 2 or 3 days a week to work your own land and produce food for your family. This arrangement means you're constantly working on the edge of survival. You need to grow enough food on your tiny plot to feed your family for the entire year, while also fulfilling your labor obligations to the Lord and paying various taxes and fees. There's no margin for error. A bad harvest, a sick draft animal, an unexpected expense, the death of a family member who provided labor. Any of these can push your family into starvation. And here's the thing that would drive a modern person insane. There's no way out. Social mobility essentially doesn't exist. You were born a serf. Your children will be serfs. Their children will be serfs. Your position in society is fixed at birth and will remain unchanged until death. The rare exceptions, a serf who somehow becomes a merchant or craftsman, or a woman who marries slightly above her station, are so unusual that they're talked about for generations. The concept of making something of yourself or pursuing your dreams would be incomprehensible to a medieval peasant. Dreams are for sleep, not for life. Your life's path is predetermined. You will farm. You will struggle. You will suffer. And eventually you will die. Probably around age 40 if you're lucky, leaving behind children who will continue the same cycle. As you head out to the fields this morning, you're carrying primitive tools that haven't changed significantly in centuries. Your plow, if you even have one, is a simple wooden implement tipped with iron if you're fortunate. It barely scratches the surface of the soil, literally. Medieval plows don't turn the soil over the way modern plows do. They just create a shallow furrow. This means the soil isn't properly aerated, nutrients aren't brought up from deeper layers, and root systems of weeds aren't fully disrupted. Your crop yields are perhaps 1/10 of what a modern farmer achieves on the same land. Most of what you grow goes to the Lord, the church, and various taxes. What's left barely feeds your family. Most plowing is done with oxen, if your community can afford them. An ox is incredibly expensive, worth perhaps a year's income for a peasant woo tuartrium continuar. 4. Going to work 9 a.m., the feudal trap continued. Family. Very few individual families own an ox. Instead, several families might pool their resources to own one together, sharing its use according to a complex schedule that's a constant source of disputes and negotiations. Oxen are slow, stubborn, and require their own food and care, which is another drain on resources. But without them, plowing is nearly impossible. Many smaller farms, or those too poor to have access to oxen, rely on human muscle power alone. This means you and your family members literally pulling the plow yourselves, strapped into harnesses like beasts of burden. This back-breaking work destroys your body even faster than normal agricultural labor. Your spine compresses, your shoulders are permanently damaged, and you develop hernias and other internal injuries that cause chronic pain for the rest of your shortened life. Your hoe is iron if you're fortunate, wood if you're not. Your sickle for harvesting is dull and needs constant sharpening on a whetstone. But sharpening wears the blade down over time, and eventually it will need to be replaced, an expense your family can barely afford. None of your tools are efficient by modern standards. Everything takes 5 times longer than it should, requires more physical effort, and produces inferior results. The field you're working today belongs to your Lord. You're planting crops that you'll never eat, on land you'll never own, under threat of punishment if you don't work hard enough. Overseers watch the laborers, men employed by the Lord specifically to make sure the serfs are working at maximum capacity. If they think you're slacking off, you'll face fines, beatings, loss of privileges, or public humiliation. The overseer carries a stick and isn't afraid to use it. The work is back-breaking, literally. You're bent over for hours at a time, digging, planting, weeding, or harvesting, depending on the season. Your spine compresses under the constant forward flexion. Your muscles scream in protest. The discs between your vertebrae are being damaged with every hour of this work. And you're doing this on minimal calories from your inadequate breakfast, which means your body is already in a catabolic state, breaking down its own muscle tissue for energy. Medieval agricultural workers commonly suffered from severe back problems, arthritis, herniated discs, and repetitive strain injuries. By the time peasants reached their 30s, many could barely walk upright. The hunched, hobbling peasant wasn't just a stereotype. It was the reality for countless people whose bodies were destroyed by decades of agricultural labor that started in early childhood. There are no breaks, no worker protections, no labor laws. You work from sunup to sundown during the growing season, which in summer means 14, 16-hour days. In winter, when there's less field work, you'll be assigned other tasks: repairing tools, clearing land, cutting wood, maintaining roads and bridges, working on the Lord's castle or manor house, anything to extract maximum value from your labor. The weather provides no mercy. If it's raining, you work in the rain. Medieval people didn't have waterproof clothing. The best you might have is a wool cloak, which absorbs water and becomes heavy cold and chafing when wet. If it's blazing hot, you work in the heat with no shade, no sunscreen, no adequate water. If it's cold enough to freeze your fingers, you still work. Frostbite, heat stroke, and hypothermia are occupational hazards that everyone faces and no one talks about because complaining is pointless and might be seen as insubordination. Women have it even worse, if that's possible. They're expected to do all the field work alongside the men, but they also bear the burden of all domestic labor. Before heading to the fields at dawn, a peasant woman has already spent hours grinding grain by hand. An exhausting process that takes 2-3 hours to produce enough flour for one day's bread. She's baked bread if it's baking day, prepared food, cared for children, tended the garden, fed animals, milked cows or goats, collected eggs, hauled water from the well, and countless other tasks. After a full day of field labor, the same hard labor the men are doing, she'll return home to more work. Cooking dinner, cleaning, mending clothes by hand in dim light, spinning wool, caring for her children, and preparing everything for the next day. There's no such thing as leisure time for a medieval peasant woman. Every waking moment is filled with labor. She might get 5-6 hours of sleep per night if she's lucky, and that sleep is interrupted by babies needing to nurse, children waking from nightmares, animals making noise, or her own body's aches and pain. And if she's pregnant, which she frequently is, given the lack of birth control and the expectation of producing as many children as possible, she's doing all of this while carrying a child. She'll work in the fields until the day she goes into labor. There's no maternity leave, no light duty, no accommodation for pregnancy. When labor begins, she'll retreat to her dwelling, give birth with the help of other women if they're available, and then return to work as soon as she's physically able afterward, often within days. The infant mortality rate is so high that the average medieval woman needs to give birth 6 or 7 times just to have 2 or 3 children survive to adulthood. Many women have 10 or more pregnancies over their reproductive years. Pregnancy and childbirth are the leading causes of death for women of reproductive age. Roughly 1 in 8 women dies from pregnancy-related complications at some point in her life. But there's no choice. Children are essential labor, and families need as many hands as possible to survive. As you work through the morning, bent over in the field, your back screaming, your hands raw and bleeding, you're joined by other serfs from the village. There's a grim camaraderie among you. Everyone understands that you're all trapped in the same system, all struggling under the same impossible burdens. You're not exactly friends. Medieval village life is full of petty disputes, jealousies, and competition for scarce resources, but you're united in suffering. Conversations, when they happen, are in a form of language so different from modern English that you'd barely recognize any words. If this is England in 750 AD, people are speaking Old English, which sounds more like German than the English we know. If you're in what will become France, they're speaking Old French or regional dialects. Communication would be incredibly difficult for a time traveler, adding another layer of isolation to your experience. The vocabulary is limited, focused on practical matters: farming, weather, tools, animals, food, abstract concepts, education, philosophy, literature. These are for the clergy and nobility, people who have the luxury of literacy and leisure. Your concerns are immediate and concrete. Survival. Will there be enough food? Will the harvest be good? Will anyone die this winter? Around you, the landscape looks both familiar and alien. These are the same fields that will exist in this location for centuries, but they're smaller, more irregular, separated by hedgerows and rough boundaries. There are no neat, geometric fields stretching to the horizon that you see in modern industrial agriculture. Instead, agriculture is piecemeal, inefficient, divided into small strips that different families farm, and barely adequate to feed the population even in good years. The agricultural techniques being used are primitive by modern standards. Crop rotation is limited, maybe a two-field system where one field lies fallow, while the other is planted, or a three-field system if the community is advanced. There's no understanding of soil chemistry, no fertilizers beyond animal manure, no pesticides, no irrigation systems. Farming is more art than science, based on tradition, observation, and hope more than real understanding. Yields are catastrophically low. A good harvest might return 4-1. For every seed planted, you harvest 4 seeds. Many years are worse. Compare this to modern agriculture, where yields of 31 or even 101 are common. This low productivity is why so many people have to work in agriculture. It takes huge amounts of human labor to produce barely enough food to sustain the population. In the distance, you can see the Lord's manor house or castle, a massive stone structure that dominates the landscape. It's a constant visual reminder of who holds the power. That building, warm and dry and filled with food, represents everything you'll never have. The Lord might ride by occasionally on his horse, inspecting his lands, and you're expected to bow, to show deference, to acknowledge your inferior status. And yet, you keep working, because what choice do you have? The feudal system is enforced not just by law, but by armed men who serve the Lord. If you rebel, if you refuse to work, if you try to leave, you'll be hunted down and punished. Your family will suffer. Your tiny plot of land might be taken away, leaving you with nothing. So you bend your back, grip your tools, and labor under the sun, knowing that this is your life from now until death. Hour 5, midday, 12 p.m., a lunch that's barely survival. Finally, a break. Well, not really a break, more like a brief pause to refuel before the afternoon's labor continues. You're not stopping because anyone cares about your well-being, but because human bodies literally cannot continue working at this intensity without some form of rest and nutrition, however minimal. Lunch, if you can call it that, is whatever you brought from home wrapped in a cloth. More bread, maybe some cheese if your family has been lucky enough to own a cow or goat, perhaps an onion or turnip, and a flask of small beer or water. The bread is the same coarse, gritty stuff from breakfast, now slightly stale, since it was baked yesterday or the day before. Bread doesn't keep well without preservatives, which don't exist yet, so it's constantly transitioning from fresh to stale to moldy. You eat it anyway, cutting away only the most obviously spoiled parts. The cheese, if you have it, is hard and salty, salt being one of the few preservatives available. It's aged not in a carefully climate-controlled facility, but in your dwelling, where it's exposed to flies, mice, and ambient bacteria. The cheese is valuable protein, but it's also a potential source of food poisoning. Bacterial contamination of dairy products is common, causing stomach cramps, diarrhea, and sometimes serious illness. But you eat it anyway, because the alternative is having no protein at all. You eat sitting on the ground in the dirt, surrounded by the same filth that's everywhere in this era. Your hands are caked with soil and manure. Medieval agriculture relies heavily on animal waste as fertilizer, and you've been handling it all morning with your bare hands. The manure gets under your fingernails, into the cracks in your skin, and there it stays. There's nowhere to wash your hands before eating. Even if there were a stream or well nearby, the concept of hand washing before meals to prevent disease won't be discovered for centuries. Ignaz Semmelweis won't demonstrate the importance of hand washing until the 1840s. And even then, the medical establishment will resist the idea for decades. In the Dark Ages, the connection between dirty hands and illness is completely unknown. So you simply wipe your hands on your already filthy clothes, which does essentially nothing, and start eating, transferring whatever bacteria and parasites are on your hands directly into your mouth with every bite. The water you drink at lunch comes from a communal jug that everyone shares. Multiple mouths have touched this vessel today, spreading whatever diseases those people are carrying. Oral herpes, tuberculosis, influenza, and countless other infections spread through shared drinking vessels. But individual cups would be an unnecessary luxury. Everything is shared: tools, food, drinking vessels, even clothing sometimes. The concept of personal property beyond the most basic items doesn't really exist at the peasant level. Looking around at your fellow workers, you notice that everyone seems to be suffering from something. One man has a persistent, racking cough, probably tuberculosis, though no one knows what causes it or how to treat it. The cough sounds wet, productive, and you can see blood speckling the hand he raises to his mouth. He's dying, slowly, and everyone knows it, but no one talks about it. What would be the point? There's nothing to be done. A woman has open sores on her arms. Could be infected insect bites, could be impetigo, could be something more serious like leprosy in its early stages. The sores are oozing, attracting flies, but she's still working. She has no choice. Her family needs her labor to survive. Leprosy is common enough in this era that most villages have at least one person afflicted with it. The disease causes numbness, skin lesions, and progressive deformity, as nerve damage and secondary infections destroy tissue. Advanced cases lose fingers, toes, noses, even entire limbs to the disease. Sufferers are often forced to live outside the village in special leper colonies, ringing bells to warn others of their approach. It's a cruel existence, but medieval people believed the disease is God's punishment for sin, or perhaps a test of faith. Another worker is missing several fingers on his left hand. Farm accidents are incredibly common. Falling from a cart, getting caught in a mill wheel, crushing injuries from heavy stones or logs, cuts from sharp tools that become infected. There are no safety regulations, no protective equipment, no emergency medical care. If you're injured, your fellow villagers might try to help, but their knowledge is limited, and their interventions often do more harm than good. That worker who lost his fingers, the accident happened a few weeks ago. The stumps are infected now, oozing pus, red and swollen. He's developing a fever. You can see it in his flushed face and the way he's shivering, despite the warm day. Without antibiotics, this infection will likely spread, possibly requiring amputation of the entire hand, possibly killing him through sepsis. He keeps working anyway, because he has no choice. His family depends on his labor. If he doesn't work, they don't eat. As you finish your meager lunch, you're still hungry. You're always hungry. The human body needs around 2,500 calories per day to function properly. more if you're doing heavy physical labor like you are. You're probably getting 1,500 calories on a good day, less during winter or times of scarcity when food stores run low. This chronic caloric deficit has numerous effects. You're constantly tired, your body never fully recovering from each day's labor. You can't concentrate well, which makes you more prone to accidents. Your body is cannibalizing its own muscle tissue to keep functioning, which makes you weaker over time, even as you're expected to do the same amount of work. You're more susceptible to disease because your immune system is compromised. Your wounds heal slowly because your body doesn't have the nutrients it needs for tissue repair. You're aging prematurely, your body wearing out faster than it should. But even as hunger gnaws at you, there's a different kind of pain that's even worse. The knowledge that the Lord's manor is filled with food. You saw the supply carts yesterday, hauling grain and meat and wine through the village on their way to the manor. Inside that stone fortress, people are eating roasted meats, fresh bread made from white flour, fruit imported from distant regions, pastries sweetened with honey or sugar, wine from the Lord's own vineyards. The inequality is staggering and inescapable. A wealthy noble might consume more food in one feast than your family eats in a month. While you're surviving on pottage and coarse bread, they're enjoying multiple course meals with different types of meat, venison, peacock, swan, all delicacies you'll never taste. Elaborate sauces made with expensive spices and delicate desserts. This isn't just about food, it's about the entire structure of society. Everything flows upward. The peasants produce the food, but most of it goes to the nobility, the church, and various middlemen. The peasants do all the work, but the nobility reaps the rewards. It's a system specifically designed to extract maximum value from the lowest class while providing them with the minimum necessary to keep them alive and working. And if you dare to complain or resist, punishments are swift and brutal. Stocks, flogging, branding, mutilation, or execution. These are the tools used to keep the peasant class in line. Every village has seen examples made of people who stepped out of line. A few years ago, a man from your village tried to run away, seeking freedom in a distant town. He was caught within a week. Strangers are immediately noticeable in medieval society, and the Lord's men have networks of informants. He was brought back and punished in the village square as an example to others. His punishment: his ear was nailed to a wooden post, and he had to stand there for hours until the Lord's steward decided he'd suffered enough and ripped the ear free, leaving him permanently disfigured. He's never been the same since, physically or psychologically. The experience broke something in him, and now he works in silent, sullen obedience, all fight gone. These public punishments serve a purpose beyond simple justice or revenge. They're theater, designed to instill fear and enforce compliance. Everyone is forced to watch. Children are brought to witness, so they learn early what happens to those who resist the social order. The lunch break ends too quickly. Maybe 20 minutes, barely enough time to choke down your food and take a few breaths. There's more work to be done. Always more work. The overseer is already calling everyone back to the fields. Hour 6:10. Afternoon labor. 1:05 p.m. Your body breaks down. The afternoon stretches out in a haze of exhaustion and pain that seems endless. The sun beats down, or rain falls, or cold wind cuts through your thin clothes. Medieval life offers no respite from the elements. You're completely at the mercy of weather, with no way to protect yourself adequately. Your body is failing in ways that would alarm and frighten a modern person. Your lower back feels like it's on fire, a constant burning sensation, punctuated by sharp stabs of pain every time you bend or twist. Your knees are swollen, the joints inflamed from hours of kneeling or squatting while you plant or weed. Your hands are raw and bleeding in places, blisters that have formed and burst and formed again. Your feet, wrapped in rough leather that barely qualifies as shoes, are blistered and infected. Every step sends jolts of pain up your legs. Every movement hurts. But you keep moving, because stopping means punishment, starvation, or both. The overseer is watching, always watching, ready to report any laziness to the Lord's steward. You've seen what happens to those reported for poor work. Fines they can't afford to pay, floggings that leave their backs bleeding, loss of privileges like access to common land for grazing animals. Around you, other workers are in similar condition. The young woman next to you, probably about 16 years old, already looks 30 by modern standards. She's been doing this work since she was 6 or 7, and her body is worn out before it ever fully matured. Her spine is curved from constant bending. Her hands are gnarled like an old woman's. Her face is prematurely lined and weathered from years of sun exposure, without any protection. She's also pregnant. You can see the slight swell of her belly despite her thin frame. This is her 3rd pregnancy, though her first 2 children died before their 2nd birthdays. One died from dysentery after drinking contaminated water, spending days in agony with bloody diarrhea before finally slipping away. The other died from a respiratory infection, coughing and struggling to breathe while his parents watched helplessly, unable to do anything to save him. She barely had time to mourn before getting pregnant again, because that's how medieval life works. You don't have the luxury of processing grief. You just keep going. She'll work in these fields until her labor begins. Then she'll give birth in her drafty, unsanitary dwelling with only the help of a local midwife whose knowledge is based on superstition and tradition rather than medical science. The midwife will use techniques passed down through generations, some helpful, many useless or actively harmful. If she survives childbirth, and there's about a 1 in 20 chance she won't, she'll be back in these fields within a week, carrying the infant with her, nursing while bent over in the dirt, exposing the baby to all the hazards of the environment. The baby will be laid in the shade at the edge of the field, where flies will crawl over its face, where dirt and debris will contaminate its blankets, where it's exposed to the same diseases and dangers as everyone else. The older man working nearby has been a serf his entire life, 50 years of unending toil. He's a survivor, which is remarkable given the conditions. Most people don't live to 50, but survival has come at a cost. His body is twisted and broken by decades of labor. He can barely straighten his back anymore. He's permanently bent forward at almost a 45-degree angle. His breathing is labored, wheezing and rattling with every breath. He's probably suffering from chronic lung disease caused by decades of breathing in grain dust, smoke from cooking fires, and the damp, moldy air of his dwelling. He coughs constantly, and there's blood in his phlegm now. You can see the dark red stains on the rag he uses to wipe his mouth. He knows what this means. Everyone knows what this means. He's dying, but he'll keep working until he physically can't anymore, because there's no such thing as retirement for a medieval peasant. You work until you die, and then your family takes over your obligations. As the afternoon progresses, tensions rise in the field. Everyone is exhausted, hungry, in pain, and patience is wearing thin. An argument breaks out between 2 workers over something trivial. One accidentally damaged the other's tool, stepping on a rake and snapping the wooden handle. Tools are precious. They represent a significant investment that a peasant family can barely afford. Replacing a broken tool might cost several days' worth of food, and the family that can't work efficiently because of broken tools falls behind, produces less, has less to eat. The argument escalates quickly. There's pushing, shouting in a dialect you can barely understand. Accusations fly back and forth. Was it truly an accident, or was there malice involved? Old, Grudges resurface. Someone mentions a dispute from years ago, something about a boundary stone moved, or a pig that got loose and damaged someone's garden. Medieval village life is full of these long, simmering resentments, petty disputes that never fully resolve because there's no effective system for mediation. Then one man punches the other, breaking his nose. Blood streams down the injured man's face, mixing with the dirt and sweat already covering him. He staggers back, then lunges forward, tackling his attacker. They grapple in the dirt, a chaotic tangle of limbs, both trying to hurt the other while the rest of you watch, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of it. The overseer comes running, not out of concern for the injured worker, but to restore order and prevent work from stopping. He wades into the fight, striking both men with his stick until they separate. Both men will be punished with a public flogging, 10 lashes each, to be administered immediately as an example to the rest of you. You're forced to watch. Everyone is forced to watch. This is how social control works in the feudal system, through public displays of violence that teach everyone to obey, submit, stay in line. The overseer orders both men to remove their shirts and kneel. The man with the broken nose receives his flogging first. Blood still pours from his nose, but he's given no time to clean himself or tend to his injury. The overseer raises his whip, a leather thong with multiple tails, designed to maximize pain, and brings it down across the man's back. Each strike tears open his skin. The sound is horrible, a wet crack followed by a scream of pain that the man tries unsuccessfully to suppress. By the 10th lash, his back is a mass of bleeding welts, his shirt soaked with blood when he's allowed to put it back on. Then, it's the other man's turn. Same result. 2 men permanently marked, their backs scarred, their flesh torn, all because of a broken rake handle and years of accumulated resentment boiling over in a moment of violence. Both men will return to work tomorrow, infected wounds and all. There's no medical care for peasants, no time off for recovery. You work through illness, injury, and pain until you physically cannot continue. The wounds on their backs will become infected. Infection is almost guaranteed, given the filthy clothing they'll wear over the wounds, the lack of any wound care, and the contaminated environment they live in. If they're lucky, the infections will remain localized and eventually heal, leaving deep scars. If they're unlucky, the infections will spread, causing sepsis that could kill them. As the sun begins to descend toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the field, your exhaustion reaches new depths. You've been awake for 12 hours. You've eaten perhaps 1,000 calories total. And you've done the equivalent of a modern construction worker's full week of labor in a single day. Your hands are shaking from exhaustion and low blood sugar. Your vision is blurry, whether from sweat dripping into your eyes, dehydration, or simple fatigue, you can't tell. Every muscle in your body is screaming for rest, but you can't stop. Not yet. The overseer is watching, making sure everyone works until the very last moment of available daylight. Daylight is precious. Artificial lighting doesn't exist for field work, so every minute of sunlight must be used. Slacking off in these final hours means punishment, and you've already witnessed what punishment looks like today. Your mind starts to wander, despite your attempts to focus. You think about your future. The future is perhaps too generous a word. You think about tomorrow, which will be identical to today, and the day after that, and the day after that. An endless succession of days just like this one, until your body finally gives out and you die. This realization that there is no hope, no possibility of improvement, no light at the end of the tunnel, is perhaps the most crushing aspect of medieval life. Modern people are raised with the idea that hard work leads to advancement, that tomorrow can be better than today, that you can improve your circumstances through effort and determination. All of that is false In the dark ages, tomorrow will be exactly like today, and nothing you do will change that. Some medieval people found comfort in religion, in the promise that suffering in this life would be rewarded in the next. The church taught that your low position in society was part of God's plan, that accepting your suffering patiently was virtuous, that eternal paradise awaited those who endured earthly trials without complaint. For many, this was the only thing that made life bearable, the belief that this wasn't all there was, that something better waited beyond death. But others, and you sense you might be one of them, found this cold comfort. The promise of future reward did little to ease present suffering, and even for the faithful, doubt sometimes crept in during moments of extreme hardship. If God loved humanity, why was life so brutally difficult for most people? Why did children die? Why did good people suffer? Medieval theology had answers to these questions, but the answers often felt inadequate when you were bent over in a field, starving, in pain, watching your family struggle to survive. Finally, mercifully, the signal comes. Work is done for the day. The overseer calls out, and you're allowed to stop. You straighten up, or try to, but your back has been bent for so many hours that standing upright is agony. Your spine has compressed, your muscles have locked into position, and forcing your body back into an upright posture causes sharp pains that make you gasp. You gather your tools. They belong to the Lord, and losing or damaging them would result in fines you can't afford, and begin the walk back to the village, a journey of perhaps a mile along rough paths. After today's labor, it feels like 10 miles. Your legs are shaking with exhaustion. You stumble occasionally, catching yourself before you fall, but just barely. Other workers shuffle along with you, everyone too tired to talk much. There's a bit of conversation. Someone mentions that it looks like rain tomorrow, which would be good for the crops but bad for working conditions. Someone else mentions that they heard the Lord might be demanding extra labor next week for some construction project at the manor. Everyone groans at this news, but quietly, because complaining too loudly could be reported and led to trouble. As you approach the village, you see smoke rising from the huts, cooking fires being prepared for the evening meal. Your stomach clenches with hunger at the thought of food, even though you know the meal will be inadequate, unsatisfying, basically identical to breakfast. Hour 11:12. Evening. 6-7 p.m. Dinner and despair. You stumble back into your dwelling as darkness begins to fall. The exhaustion is total, overwhelming, unlike anything you've experienced in modern life. This isn't the tiredness you feel after a long day at the office, or even after a day of heavy physical work. This is exhaustion at a cellular level. Your body completely depleted, running on fumes, every system shutting down in preparation for the brief rest that sleep will provide. But there's still work to be done. There's always more work to be done. For the women of the household, the evening is just another shift beginning. While the men collapse from exhaustion, women must prepare dinner, which means tending the fire, adding ingredients to the pottage that's been simmering all day, and preparing whatever else will constitute the evening meal. Some new ingredients have been added to today's pottage. A few vegetables from the small garden plot near the dwelling. Onions, leeks, maybe some cabbage if it's the right season. Perhaps some herbs if they're available. Parsley, thyme, or sage growing wild nearby. But it's fundamentally the same meal you've been eating for weeks, months, years. The base never changes. Grain and water, sometimes enriched with vegetables, or, on very rare occasions, a tiny bit of meat or fat. There's a reason medieval recipes are so repetitive. People simply didn't have access to variety. The global trade networks that bring us foods from around the world don't exist yet. Refrigeration doesn't exist, so you can't preserve foods for long periods. Seasonal eating isn't a trendy lifestyle choice. It's the only option. You eat what's growing right now in this region and nothing else. In autumn, there might be apples or pears from local trees. In summer, maybe some berries, strawberries, blackberries, or raspberries, if you can find them wild or grow them in your garden. In spring, fresh greens if you're lucky, lettuce, spinach, or chard. But for most of the year, especially during the long winter months when nothing grows, the diet is monotonous. Grain, root vegetable stored in cellars, occasionally some preserved fish or meat if you can afford it. This monotonous diet leads to severe nutritional deficiencies. Scurvy from lack of vitamin C is common in winter and spring when fresh produce isn't available, causing bleeding gums, loose teeth, poor wound healing, and eventually death if severe enough. Rickets from lack of vitamin D deforms children's bones, causing bowed legs, curved spines, and other skeletal abnormalities. Anemia from insufficient iron leaves people weak, pale, and constantly exhausted. Beriberi from lack of thiamine causes nerve damage, heart problems, and mental confusion. Pellagra from niacin deficiency causes dermatitis, diarrhea, and dementia. The medieval diet, such as it is, barely provides enough calories to survive, let alone adequate nutrition. Tonight's dinner includes a small piece of salted fish, a rare treat that someone managed to acquire. A fisherman from the village recently returned from a trading expedition to the coast, several days' journey away, and he brought back preserved fish to sell. Your family could barely afford it. The fish cost nearly a week's worth of a family's surplus production. The protein is protein, and it's been weeks since you've had anything other than grain and vegetables. The fish is so heavily salted that it burns your mouth and throat with every bite. Salt was the primary method of food preservation before refrigeration, and foods preserved this way were barely edible without extensive preparation. You're supposed to soak salted fish in fresh water for hours or even days before eating it to remove excess salt and rehydrate the flesh. But your family didn't have time to soak the fish properly, or perhaps you didn't have enough clean water to spare for soaking, so you're eating it salt and all, washing it down with beer to try to dilute the overwhelming saltiness. Your teeth ache as you chew. That cavity that's been bothering you for months is getting worse, the pain sharper and more constant. There's a deep, throbbing ache in your jaw that radiates up into your head. The tooth is probably obsessed now, an infection forming at the root where bacteria have penetrated through the decayed enamel and dentin. Without modern dentistry, your options are limited, and all of them are terrible. Suffer with the pain, hoping it doesn't get worse or spread. Try folk remedies like packing the tooth with herbs or applying poultices to your cheek, which do essentially nothing, or have it extracted by someone with no training, no anesthesia, and unsanitized tools. You've seen tooth extractions before, and the memory makes you shudder. The barber surgeon, the closest thing to a medical professional in your village, uses a crude pair of pliers, essentially a blacksmith's tool repurposed for dental work. The patient is held down by several strong men, struggling and screaming, while the tooth is yanked out with brutal force. Often, the tooth breaks during extraction, leaving fragments embedded in the gum that have to be dug out with sharp instruments. The screaming is something you'll never forget. Raw, animal sounds of agony that go on and on until the procedure is finally finished. And the aftermath is almost as bad as the procedure itself. The extraction site bleeds profusely, filling the patient's mouth with blood that they have to keep spitting out. There's no way to close or stitch the wound, so it just has to heal on its own, which takes weeks. During that time, eating is extremely painful, and the open wound is constantly exposed to food particles and bacteria, frequently leading to infection. Sometimes the extraction site becomes seriously infected, with the infection spreading to the jawbone, a condition called osteomyelitis. When this happens, the bone itself begins to rot and die, causing excruciating pain, fever, and swelling. Treatment options are essentially non-existent. Some people survive after the dead bone eventually separates and is expelled from the body. Others die from sepsis. When the infection spreads to their bloodstream, you decide to endure the toothache for now, hoping it won't get worse. But you know you're just delaying the inevitable. As you eat your dinner, the entire family is gathered around the fire. The flames provide the only light now that the sun has set. There are no candles. They're far too expensive for peasants. Beeswax candles are luxury items that only the wealthy can afford. Tallow candles made from animal fat are sometimes available, but they smell terrible, smoke heavily, and provide minimal light. Mostly, you just live by the rhythm of the sun. Awake when retrum continuar 11:12. Evening 6-7 p.m. Dinner and despair continue. It's light, asleep when it's dark. Artificial lighting is simply too expensive and too labor-intensive to produce for everyday use. The conversation around the fire is subdued. Everyone is exhausted from the day's labor. Your father, who normally leads family discussions, is mostly silent tonight, staring into the flames with a distant expression. Finally, he speaks, and what he says sends a chill through the room despite the fire's warmth. He mentions that the harvest doesn't look good this year. The spring was too wet, causing some seeds to rot in the ground before they could germinate. Then the summer was too dry, stunting the growth of what did manage to sprout. The crops are short, the grain head small and sparse. There might not be enough grain to last through winter. Even before the Lord takes his share, the church takes its tithe, and various other taxes and fees are paid. This is the nightmare scenario that every medieval peasant family fears: famine. The word itself is almost too terrible to speak aloud, but it hangs in the air like smoke, choking hope. In a good year, most families barely scrape by, producing just enough to feed themselves after meeting their obligations. In a bad year, people starve. Not metaphorically, literally starve to death, their bodies consuming themselves from within as they slowly waste away. History records numerous famines throughout the Dark Ages and medieval period, each one killing significant percentages of the population. The Great Famine of 1315-1317, which technically falls just after the Dark Ages proper, but illustrates the persistent pattern, killed up to 25% of the population in some regions. People resorted to eating grass, tree bark, rats, cats, dogs, and eventually, in the most desperate cases, even cannibalism. Parents made impossible choices about which children to try to keep alive and which to let slip away. Entire villages were depopulated, with survivors too weak to bury the dead, leaving corpses to rot where they fell. Your mother is trying to calculate how to stretch the food stores. Her face is tight with worry as she mentally inventories what's in the storage pit, the underground chamber where grain and root vegetables are kept. Should she reduce everyone's portions now to make the food last longer, or maintain current portions, inadequate as they are, and risk running out completely before spring when new crops can be harvested? This is the impossible math of medieval survival. There are no good options, only choices between different types of suffering. Reduce portions now, and everyone is weakened, more vulnerable to disease, less able to work. Maintain portions until the food runs out, and then face weeks or months of total starvation with no reserves at all. Your younger brother, about 8 years old, asks why he can't have more food. He's hungry. He's always hungry. His small body is developing, growing, and desperately needs nutrition that isn't available. Your mother snaps at him, not because she's cruel, but because she's terrified and overwhelmed. She can see the numbers not adding up. She knows that some children in this village won't survive the winter. She's trying not to think about which of her children might be among them. Medieval child mortality rates are difficult for modern people to comprehend. Roughly 1/3 of children die before age 5 total. Of those who survive to 5, many more die before reaching adulthood. Disease, malnutrition, accidents, infections. Childhood is a minefield of potential death. This means that parents have to maintain a certain emotional distance from their children, especially very young children. Getting too attached to a baby who has a 30-35% chance of dying before their first birthday is a recipe for constant, devastating heartbreak. Some historians have argued that medieval people loved their children less than we do. That's not true. The evidence from letters, diaries, and other sources shows that parents grieved deeply when children died. But they had to love them differently, with a constant awareness that death could come at any moment. You look at your younger brother, hungry and thin, ribs visible through his worn tunic, and wonder if you'll see his next birthday. The thought is unbearable, so you push it away and focus on your food, what little there is. The fish is gone now. It provided perhaps 100 calories, barely enough to matter given the day's exertion. The pottage is scraped clean from the communal bowl. Your stomach is still growling, demanding more food that doesn't exist. But there's no more food. Not tonight. The hunger is a physical presence, gnawing and insistent. It's not the mild, slightly uncomfortable hunger you feel in modern life when you've gone a few hours without eating. This is the deep, desperate hunger of a body that's chronically underfed, that's running on fumes, that's breaking down its own tissues to keep functioning. Your body is sending urgent signals. Feed me, feed me, feed me. But there's nothing to feed it with. As dinner concludes, such as it was, there's a knock at the door. Your father opens it to find the Lord's steward standing there, accompanied by 2 armed guards. The steward is well fed. His clothes are clean and well maintained, and he radiates the quiet confidence of someone who has power and knows it. The steward is here to collect taxes. In addition to the labor you owe, 3 or more days per week working the Lord's fields. Peasant families must also pay various taxes and fees in kind. A portion of your harvest must be turned over to the Lord. Fees must be paid for using the Lord's mill, his oven, his wine press. The church requires its tithe, literally 1/10 of everything you produce. There are fees for marriages, fees for inheritance, fees for grazing animals on common land. The list seems endless, each one a small bite that together devour most of what you produce. The steward examines your family's grain stores with a practiced, calculating eye. He knows exactly what to look for, exactly how much grain a family of your size should have at this time of year. He calculates what you owe with quick mental arithmetic. Your father tries to negotiate, explaining that the harvest was poor this year, that the family needs more grain to survive the winter, that taking the full amount will leave you dangerously short. The steward is unmoved. He's heard this story 1,000 times, from 1,000 desperate peasants. Every family claims the harvest was poor. Every family begs for leniency. But the Lord's taxes must be paid. The Lord has his own obligations. To the king, to his military forces, to maintaining his manner and lifestyle. The steward's job is to extract the required resources, and he's very good at his job. Sympathy, compassion, flexibility. These are luxuries he can't afford if he wants to keep his position. A significant portion of your grain is measured out and loaded onto the guard's cart. You watch your winter food supply literally being carted away, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can't resist. The guards are armed, and resistance would be met with violence and additional punishment. You can't appeal to a higher authority. The Lord is the authority, and his word is law on his lands. You can't hide the grain. The steward knows how much you should have. and being caught hiding resources would result in severe punishment, possibly including forfeiture of your land rights and expulsion from the village. After the steward leaves, your family sits in stunned silence. Your mother is crying softly, trying to hide her tears, but everyone can hear the quiet sobs she's unable to fully suppress. Your father is staring into the fire again, his face expressionless, but you can see his hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles are white. You know that look. It's despair, carefully controlled because showing too much emotion is a luxury that medieval people can't afford. Breaking down doesn't change anything. The grain is gone. The winter will be hard, and falling apart would only make it harder. You will be hungry this winter. Very, very hungry. People will die in this village. Maybe someone in your family. These aren't abstract possibilities. Based on past years and current food stores, they're likely outcomes. Mathematical probabilities that everyone can calculate, but no one wants to speak aloud. And there's nothing you can do about it. Nothing at all. Hour 13. Nightfall, 8 p.m. When darkness brings terror. As full darkness descends, the medieval world transforms into something genuinely frightening. We're so accustomed to electric lights, street lights, flashlights, and the ambient glow of civilization that we forget what true darkness is like. We've conquered the night with technology, banishing shadows and making nighttime almost as safe and navigable as day. Medieval darkness is absolute. When the sun sets, the world becomes an impenetrable black void. The fire inside your dwelling provides a small circle of flickering, unreliable light. But beyond that radius, there is nothing but darkness so complete that you literally cannot see your hand in front of your face. Going outside at night is dangerous for multiple reasons. The practical dangers include tripping over obstacles you can't see, falling into ditches or wells, encountering wild animals, or stumbling into areas contaminated with human waste. The paths and streets that are navigable during daylight become obstacle courses in darkness. You could easily break a leg, fall into the drainage ditch that runs alongside the path, or step into something unspeakably foul. But medieval people believe in supernatural dangers as well, and these are taken far more seriously than we might imagine. Night is when demons, witches, ghosts, and evil spirits are most active. The darkness isn't just an absence of light. It's believed to be actively malevolent, full of unseen threats that lurk just beyond human perception. These beliefs aren't dismissed as mere superstition by medieval people. They're taken as seriously as we take scientifically proven dangers. Every culture has stories of people who ventured out at night and were never seen again, or were found the next morning, dead or driven mad with terror. Whether these stories reflect actual dangers, animal attacks, accidents, violence from other humans, or are pure fiction designed to enforce social control doesn't matter. People believe them, and belief shapes behavior. The Catholic Church reinforces these fears through its teaching. Priests regularly preach about the devil and his minions prowling in darkness, seeking souls to claim. Nighttime is when Satan's power is strongest, when the barrier between the earthly realm and the infernal realm grows thin. Going out after dark is spiritually dangerous, putting your immortal soul at risk. This creates a genuine terror of darkness that most modern people can't relate to. When night falls, you stay inside. You huddle close to the fire. You pray, and you wait for dawn, hoping to survive another night. But staying inside doesn't guarantee safety. Your dwelling isn't secure by modern standards. The door is rough wood held closed by a simple wooden bar or latch. No locks, no deadbolts, no security systems. There are gaps in the walls where the wattle and daub has crumbled or never properly sealed. The windows, such as they are are just holes covered with cloth or shutters that can be easily pushed aside. Theft is common and nearly impossible to prevent. Desperate people do desperate things. And in a society where most people are living on the edge of starvation, crime is prevalent. Someone might slip into your dwelling at night and steal your food stores, your tool, or anything else of value. And you might not even wake up until they're gone. Until you discover in the morning that your grain sack has been cut open and emptied, that your family's survival has been stolen while you slept. Even worse, violent crime is shockingly common by modern standards. The murder rate in medieval England was roughly 10-20 times higher than in modern Western countries. Life is cheap, the justice system is inconsistent and often corrupt, and personal disputes frequently escalate to violence. Blood feuds between families can last for generations, with cycles of revenge killings that never fully resolve. Just last month, a man from your village was killed in a dispute over a boundary marker between two fields. The argument had been simmering for years, each family claiming that their field extended further than the other admitted. One evening, after both men had been drinking, the dispute turned violent. One man struck the other with a farming implement, crushing his skull. He died within hours, leaving behind a widow and 4 children who are now destitute. The killer was caught. It happened in view of witnesses and executed. He was hanged in the village square, his body left dangling as a warning. But the execution doesn't bring the victim back, doesn't restore his family's provider, doesn't undo the violence. His widow and children are now completely dependent on charity from other villagers who themselves have almost nothing to spare. The children will likely be split up, sent to different families as servants or extra labor, their family unit destroyed by one moment of drunken rage. So night brings not just darkness, but legitimate fear. Fear of the supernatural, fear of criminals, fear of violence, fear of the unknown. You listen to every sound with heightened alertness. Wind in the thatch, animals moving around outside, the settling of the wooden frame of your dwelling, distant sounds from other dwellings. Any unexpected noise could be a threat. Your family prepares for sleep, which means basically just lying down where you are. There's no bedtime routine as we understand it. No brushing teeth. That's not a thing. No changing into pajamas. You'll sleep in the same clothes you wore all day because you don't own sleepwear, and undressing would expose you to the cold. The children settle onto their straw pallets, already half asleep from exhaustion. Your parents move to their slightly larger sleeping area. Not a separate room, just a different corner of the single room, perhaps with a curtain for minimal privacy. Everyone is exhausted, bone-deep tired in a way that modern people rarely experience. But sleep doesn't come easily despite the exhaustion. The discomfort is constant and prevents deep sleep. The straw is lumpy, compacted in some places and sparse in others, creating an uneven surface that digs into your body. The thin blankets, wool that scratches your skin, provide inadequate warmth. The cold seeps up from the ground beneath you and down from the drafty roof above, creating a chill that penetrates to your core. Your body aches from the day's labor. Your back throbs with a deep, persistent pain. Your hands are raw and sore. Tooth pain pulses in your jaw. Your empty stomach cramps and growls. These physical discomforts combine to make sleep difficult despite your overwhelming tiredness. And the animals are restless, adding to the nighttime disturbances. The chickens shift and cluck softly, disturbed by something you can't identify. The goat makes soft, bleating noises, perhaps hungry or uncomfortable. Something, probably a rat, scurries across the floor, its claws scratching against the packed dirt. You can hear it moving around, searching for food, probably heading toward your grain sack. Rats are everywhere in medieval dwellings, an unavoidable fact of life. They eat stored food, gnaw through materials looking for nesting material, and occasionally bite people in their sleep if they smell food on them. Rat bites are painful and often become infected. Worse, rats carry fleas, and those fleas carry diseases, though you don't know this. The connection between rats, fleas, and disease won't be understood for centuries. You just know that rats are associated with illness. When rat populations explode, disease outbreaks often follow. The mechanism is unknown, but the pattern has been observed and feared. As you lie there in the darkness, unable to sleep despite your exhaustion, you have too much time to think. And thinking in the dark ages leads to dark places. There's too much to worry about, too many threats, too much suffering with no clear path to relief. You think about the winter ahead and whether your family will survive it. The food shortage isn't abstract. It's immediate and terrifying. You're already hungry now. In autumn, when food should be relatively plentiful, what will January feel like? February? March? The hungry month, when winter stores are depleted, but spring crops haven't yet been planted. You think about your toothache and whether the infection will spread. You've known people who died from infected teeth, the infection spreading to the jaw, then to the blood, causing fever and delirium before death. It's a terrifying way to die and entirely possible. You think about your bound status as a serf and the fact that you'll never be free. This isn't temporary hardship. This is your life forever. You'll die doing this same work, living in this same squalor, serving the same Lord or his descendants. You think about your children, if you have them, and their grim futures. They'll inherit your position, your poverty, your suffering. There's no possibility of giving them a better life. The best you can hope for is that they survive to adulthood, which itself is far from guaranteed. There's no hope for improvement, no dreams of a better life. The social order is fixed, ordained by God according to the church. Kings rule because God wants them to. Nobles are noble because God made them so. And you are a peasant because that is God's will for you. Your position in the social hierarchy is part of the divine plan, and questioning it is heresy. Questioning this order is not just socially unacceptable, it's literally heresy, punishable by excommunication or worse. The church teaches that the social hierarchy is ordained by God, that everyone has their proper place, and that accepting your place is a religious duty. To rebel against your Lord is to rebel against God's plan. To wish for a different life is to reject God's wisdom. So you don't question, at least not openly. You suffer, you endure, and you tell yourself this is all part of God's plan, that your suffering in this life will be rewarded in the next. Heaven awaits those who bear their burdens patiently, who accept their suffering without complaint, who submit to authority as God commands. The church teaches that earthly life is brief and full of suffering anyway. It's just a temporary trial before the eternal afterlife. The rich and powerful will be judged just as harshly as the poor. In fact, Jesus taught that it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven. So maybe your poverty and suffering are actually advantages in the spiritual realm, tests that will prove your worthiness for paradise. But right now, in this cold, dark, painful moment, heaven seems very far away. Paradise is an abstract concept. Pain and hunger are immediate and real. Hour 14:20, deep night, 9 p.m., 3 a.m., the long suffering. The hours between nightfall and dawn stretch out interminably, each minute feeling like an hour. Sleep, when it comes, is shallow and interrupted. You drift in and out of consciousness, never fully resting, never achieving the deep restorative sleep that your exhausted body desperately needs. Around midnight, you wake suddenly to the sound of screaming. Your heart pounds, adrenaline flooding your system. What's happening? An attack? A fire? Some supernatural threat? Your mind races through possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. No, it's the woman in the dwelling next to yours. She's in labor, and her cries of pain penetrate through the thin walls that separate your living spaces. The sound is primal, raw, filled with an agony that makes everyone who hears it uncomfortable, but unable to help. Childbirth in the Dark Ages is a terrifying ordeal for everyone involved. There are no hospitals, no doctors trained in obstetrics, no pain medication, no surgical interventions if something goes wrong, no understanding of infection control, no ability to perform emergency procedures, no blood transfusions if she hemorrhages. Instead, there's a local midwife, an older woman in the village whose knowledge comes from experience and folk tradition rather than medical training. She's attended dozens of births, maybe hundreds over her lifetime. She's seen successful deliveries and tragic deaths. She knows what usually works and what usually doesn't. But her knowledge is limited by the understanding of her era, which is to say, extremely limited. The laboring woman's female relatives and neighbors have gathered to help. This is how birth works in medieval times. It's a communal female experience, taking place at home with women supporting each other through the ordeal. Men are excluded from the birthing chamber. This is strictly women's work, women's knowledge, women's domain. The woman's husband is outside, pacing, unable to help, forced to listen to his wife's screams and pray that both she and the baby survive. The screaming continues for hours. Each contraction brings fresh waves of pain, and the woman cries out, her voice growing hoarse from the sustained screaming. You try to block it out, but it's impossible. Everyone in the village can hear her. Birth is not a private event in medieval society. Everyone knows when a woman is in labor. Everyone hears her pain. Everyone waits to learn whether the outcome will be joy or tragedy. You've heard this before, many times. Last year, a woman in the village died in childbirth, bleeding out before anyone could help her. The midwife tried everything she knew, packing cloths, stopped the bleeding, giving herbal remedies that were supposed to help, praying fervently, but nothing worked. The woman bled and bled, her life literally flowing out of her, while her family watched helplessly. The baby died too, never taking a single breath. It was a double tragedy, and the woman's husband was left with 3 other young children to care for, and no wife to help raise them. Maternal mortality rates in the Dark Ages and medieval period are difficult to calculate precisely, but estimates suggest somewhere around 1–2% per birth. That sounds relatively low. 98% survival rate doesn't sound too bad, right? But consider that women have multiple pregnancies. If you have 6 or 7 children, your cumulative risk of dying in childbirth is roughly 1 in 8. That's a terrifying statistic. Every pregnancy is a gamble with death. Finally, as dawn approaches, you hear a different sound cutting through the woman's screams, the cry of a newborn baby. The mother has survived. The baby has survived. There's a collective exhale of relief from everyone who is awake and listening. 2 people who might have died are still alive. It's a victory, small but genuine. But survival of the birth is just the first hurdle. The mother now faces weeks of recovery in an unsanitary environment, at high risk for postpartum infections that frequently prove fatal. Puerperal fever, infection of the uterus after childbirth, kills many women in the days and weeks following delivery. The baby faces all the dangers of medieval infancy: respiratory infections, diarrheal diseases, accidents, malnutrition, sudden unexplained death. If this baby makes it to age 5, it will be fortunate. If it makes it to adulthood, it will be exceptional. As the village settles back into uneasy rest after the birth, you lie awake, thinking about life, death, and the randomness of survival in this era. People die suddenly and frequently. A healthy person can be dead within days from an infection, an injury, a disease that appears from nowhere. Death is random, unpredictable, and ever-present. There's no warning, no diagnosis, no treatment plan, no second opinions, just sudden illness, and then death. Or sometimes, slow-wasting diseases that drain the life out of someone over months while their family watches helplessly, unable to do anything but pray and wait for the inevitable end. You've known so many people who have died. Your older sister, dead at age 12 from a fever that came on suddenly and killed her within 3 days. Your grandparents, both dead before age 50 from illnesses that were never properly identified. Neighbors, friends, acquaintances. Death is everywhere, a constant presence that touches every family, every community. Medieval people develop a different relationship with death than we have. It's not something distant that happens to others, something you might encounter a few times in your life at funerals of elderly relatives. It's immediate, personal, and ever-present. Children grow up surrounded by death. They see corpses regularly. They attend funerals frequently. Death is normalized in a way that would seem morbid or disturbing to modern people. This proximity to death shapes medieval psychology in profound ways. Life is seen as temporary, transient, a brief passage before the eternal afterlife. The church emphasizes this constantly. Don't get too attached to earthly life because it's brief and full of suffering anyway. Focus on saving your soul for eternity. Your time on earth might end tomorrow. Are you prepared to face God's judgment? This worldview helps people cope with the harsh realities of medieval life, but it also creates a certain fatalism. Why try to improve conditions if life is meant to be suffering? Why question the social order if it's ordained by God? Why invest too much emotion in relationships when death might sever them at any moment? As you lie there in the darkness, you hear other sounds punctuating the night. Someone coughing, a common sound in medieval nights. Respiratory diseases are endemic, and the sound of coughing is as familiar as breathing. That cough could be a simple cold, or it could be tuberculosis, which kills roughly 1 in 7 people in medieval Europe. The person coughing tonight is your uncle, the same man you noticed earlier who's been sick for several months. His cough sounds wet, productive, and you can hear him spitting, probably blood-tinged phlegm, though you can't see it in the darkness. He's dying, slowly but inexorably. Everyone knows it, but no one talks about it directly. What would be the point? There's no treatment, no cure, no hope for recovery. He'll continue coughing, growing weaker, losing weight, until his body finally gives out and he dies. Tuberculosis was called consumption in earlier eras because it seemed to consume the sufferer from within. People wasted away, their bodies literally being consumed by the disease. It's a slow death, usually taking months or even years, during which the sufferer becomes increasingly weak, gaunt, and sick. And there's nothing to be done except wait for the end and try to prevent the disease from spreading to others. Though medieval people don't understand how disease spreads, so prevention is largely ineffective. Your uncle will die in the same dwelling where he's lived his entire life, surrounded by family if he's fortunate, possibly alone if his illness becomes too burdensome for others. His body will be wrapped in a simple shroud, the same worn cloth that served as a blanket in life, and buried in the churchyard in a grave that might not even be marked. And life will continue, because it has to. People don't have the luxury of extended mourning periods. There's too much work to be done, Too many mouths still needing to be fed. Another sound breaks the silence of the deep night. Church bells, ringing for matins, the nighttime prayer service. It's around 3 a.m., and the monks in the nearby monastery are waking for their religious duties. The bells serve multiple purposes, calling the monks to prayer, marking the passage of time for the community, and reminding everyone that the church is always present, always watching, always controlling the rhythm of life. Even in the middle of the night, the church asserts its authority and influence. These bells aren't optional. They're a constant reminder that your life is not your own, that you're part of a larger religious and social order that demands your obedience and submission. You won't be expected to attend matins. That's for the clergy and the especially devout. But you're expected to say a brief prayer when you hear the bells. So you mumble a prayer in the darkness, words you've repeated thousands of times, but which have long since lost any real meaning through endless repetition. You ask God for protection through the remaining hours of darkness, for daily bread, for mercy, for deliverance from evil. The words are automatic, ritualistic, a habit so ingrained that you don't even think about what you're saying. Religion permeates every aspect of medieval life in a way that's difficult for modern secular people to understand. There's no separation between church and state, no secular sphere, no concept of personal belief as distinct from public religious practice. Everyone is Catholic. There are no alternatives except Judaism, which is barely tolerated and frequently persecuted, or Islam, which exists only as a distant, feared enemy. Everything is viewed through a religious lens. Natural disasters like floods, droughts, or earthquakes are punishments from God for collective sin. Diseases are tests of faith or consequences of personal sin. Success is divine favor. Failure is God's judgment. Good harvests mean God is pleased. Bad harvests mean you've angered him somehow and need to repent. This creates an intensely superstitious culture where people are constantly trying to read divine will in everyday events. Did your cow die suddenly? Maybe you didn't pray enough. Did your child recover from illness? God has shown mercy. Did lightning strike your neighbor's house? He must have committed some sin that angered God. People believe in miracles, genuine, literal, supernatural interventions in the natural world. They believe in demonic possession, where evil spirits enter people's bodies and control their actions. They believe in saints' intercessions, where dead holy people can be petitioned to ask God for favors on your behalf. They believe in the power of holy relics, supposed pieces of saints' bodies or objects associated with Jesus or Mary, a splinter supposedly from the true cross, a bone supposedly from Saint Peter's finger, a piece of cloth supposedly touched by the Virgin Mary. These objects are believed to have genuine supernatural power. Churches accumulate these relics and use them to attract pilgrims who bring money and enhance the church's prestige. It's a medieval economy based partly on faith and superstition, and it works because everyone believes, or at least everyone publicly professes belief. If you were to suggest that these beliefs are false, that miracles don't happen, that relics are just old wood and bones with no special power, that diseases are caused by natural processes rather than divine judgment, you'd be declared a heretic. Heresy is one of the most serious crimes in medieval society, punishable by excommunication, which means eternal damnation in medieval thinking, or even execution. People have been burned at the stake for questioning church doctrine. So you keep your doubts to yourself, if you have any. You pray when you're supposed to pray, attend church when required, pay your tithes, and hope that's enough to secure your eternal soul. Because ultimately, that's what matters most in medieval thinking. Not your earthly life, which is brief and full of suffering anyway, but your eternal destination after death, heaven or hell, salvation or damnation. Those are the only two options, and your eternal fate depends on your obedience to church teachings. The church has a monopoly on salvation. Only through the church's sacraments, baptism, communion, confession, last rites, can you access God's grace and avoid eternal torment. This gives the church enormous power, which it wields ruthlessly to maintain control over every aspect of society. The threat of excommunication is often more effective than the threat of physical violence, because excommunication means not just social isolation, but eternal damnation. As you finally drift back into fitful sleep, your last conscious thoughts are prayers. Prayers for protection through the remaining hours of night. Prayers for enough food to survive the coming winter. Prayers that tomorrow won't bring new disasters. Prayers how medieval people cope with a world they can't control, can't understand, and can barely survive. Hour 21:24. Dawn, and the cycle repeats. 4:06 a.m. The rooster crows, its harsh call shattering what little sleep you've managed to achieve. Morning has arrived far too quickly. You've perhaps managed 3 or 4 hours of actual sleep, interrupted by discomfort, animal noises, the sounds of childbirth, church bells, and your own anxious thoughts. You wake feeling worse than when you went to bed, if that's even possible. The exhaustion has settled deeper into your bones, becoming a permanent condition rather than a temporary state. Your muscles are stiff and sore from yesterday's labor, and you know today will only add to the damage. That toothache is worse this morning. The infection is spreading, and the pain is now constant rather than intermittent. Your stomach is cramping from hunger, a gnawing emptiness that's become your baseline condition. And you know that today will be exactly like yesterday. The same backbreaking labor in the fields, the same inadequate food, the same suffering, the same fear. And tomorrow will be the same, and the day after that, and every day for the rest of your life. There is no weekend to look forward to. The concept doesn't exist. Sunday is supposed to be a day of rest, but it's filled with mandatory church attendance, and you'll still need to tend to animals, prepare food, and do essential maintenance. There are no vacation days, no holidays except religious feast days, which are often just different forms of obligation. No retirement, just endless cycles of work, barely adequate rest, and constant struggle for survival. This is what would break a modern person who imagines themselves in the Dark Ages. Not any single aspect of the suffering, but the totality of it, combined with the absolute knowledge that there is no escape, no improvement, no hope for change. You will work in those fields until your body gives out. You will eat inadequate food until malnutrition ravages your health. You will live in squalor until disease finally kills you. And your children will do exactly the same. The social structure that keeps you trapped is reinforced by every institution in society. The feudal system that legally binds you to the land. The church that preaches acceptance of your station as God's will. The military power of the nobility that crushes any resistance. And the deeply ingrained cultural belief that the social hierarchy is natural, inevitable, and divinely ordained. There have been peasant revolts throughout history, desperate uprisings of people pushed beyond endurance, but they're almost always crushed brutally. The ruling class has professional soldiers, quality weapons and armor, horses, training, and fortifications. Peasants have farming tools and desperation. It's not a fair fight, and the outcomes are predictable. Revolts are suppressed. Leaders are executed in horrific ways as warnings to others, and conditions often get worse after failed rebellions as lords crack down harder to prevent future uprisings. So rebellion is not just risky, it's essentially futile. Escape is also impossible for practical reasons. Where would you go? Other lands have the same feudal system, or worse. And even if you could physically leave, You'd be a fugitive with no legal rights, no ability to make a living, no community to support you. Fugitive serfs who are caught face severe punishments designed to deter others from trying. You've seen what happens to runaways. You're trapped, completely, inescapably, permanently trapped in a life of suffering with no possibility of improvement. As you drag yourself out of bed, a process that takes several painful minutes as your damaged body slowly unfolds, and prepare to face another day identical to yesterday, you think about the merchant who passed through the village last week. He was traveling from town to town, trading goods, and for a moment you envied him. He had freedom, or at least more freedom than you'll ever have. He could travel, see different places, make his own decisions about his life and work. But then you learned that he'd been robbed on the road the week before. Bandits had beaten him severely, taken all his goods, and left him for dead. He barely survived, managing to crawl to a nearby village where he was given minimal help. Now he's trying to rebuild his trading stock with borrowed money, heavily in debt, possibly ruined financially. The roads are incredibly dangerous. Bandits and outlaws lurk in forests and remote areas, preying on travelers. Wilritrimyor 21:24. Dawn and the cycle repeats. 4:06 a.m. No escape continued. D animals, wolves, bears in some regions, pose genuine threats to solitary travelers. Exposure to the elements can kill you if you're caught in a storm without shelter. Disease-ridden towns spread infections to newcomers who lack immunity to local strains of illness. So maybe your bondage to this land is a kind of safety, a terrible thought that nonetheless contains some truth. At least you know this place. At least you have shelter, however inadequate. At least you have a community, however impoverished and dysfunctional. At least you have some predictability in a world where uncertainty often means death. This is how medieval people cope psychologically, by telling themselves it could be worse. And it always could be worse. There's always someone suffering more, someone in a more desperate situation. You could be a leper, forced to live outside society entirely, physically rotting while still alive, ringing a bell to warn people of your approach, surviving on whatever charity people throw at you from a distance. You could be a slave in a Muslim land, having been captured during a raid or battle, with absolutely no rights or hope of freedom, property to be bought and sold at your owner's whim. You could be a criminal, facing execution by hanging, beheading, or burning, or facing mutilation, having a hand cut off for theft, your nose cut off for lying, being blinded for poaching. You could be dead, which many people your age already are. So you tell yourself you're lucky, even though nothing about your situation resembles what any modern person would consider fortunate. You have your health. Mostly, you're not dying of anything acute, just slowly being destroyed by chronic conditions. You have family. They're alive, present, even if relationships are strained by constant stress and competition for scarce resources. You have enough food to survive, barely. You're hungry all the time, but you're not actively starving to death at this moment. You have your faith, which promises eternal reward for earthly suffering, and you prepare to face another day in the dark ages, knowing that this is your life now and forever. There is no escape. There is no improvement. There is only endurance day after day, year after year, until death finally releases you. The cycle continues, endless and unchanging, as dawn light filters weakly through the gaps in your dwelling. Turning the darkness from black to gray, you step outside to face whatever this day brings. The village is waking around you, the same scene repeated in dozens of similar dwellings. Smoke rises from other huts as fires are rekindled for the day's cooking. Animals are stirring, chickens clucking, goats bleating, the occasional dog barking. People emerge from their dwellings, looking as exhausted and miserable as you feel. Everyone moves slowly, stiffly, bodies damaged by years of this existence. Even the young people, teenagers, and those in their 20s, move like they're decades older. There's no spring in anyone's step, no energy or enthusiasm, just grim determination to get through another day. The church bell rings, calling the faithful to morning prayers. You'll be expected to attend, adding another obligation to your already overwhelming day. Missing church services is a sin that can result in public penance, fines levied by the church court, or social ostracism. So you'll go, stand in the cold stone church while the priest delivers a sermon in Latin that you don't understand, and try not to fall asleep despite your exhaustion. The priest will probably preach about accepting your suffering as God's will, about the virtue of obedience, about the rewards that await the faithful in heaven. He'll remind you that questioning the social order is rebellion against God, that your poverty is part of divine plan, that earthly suffering is temporary, but eternal consequences are forever. It's the same message you've heard hundreds of times, designed to keep you compliant, obedient, resigned to your fate. The Lord's steward is already up and visible in the distance, preparing to supervise the day's labor. He watches the peasants emerging from their dwellings with calculating eyes, mentally noting who looks capable of heavy work and who might be shirking. He's checking for absentees, for people trying to avoid their labor obligations by claiming illness. He has a list of tasks that need to be accomplished today, and he'll make sure every available worker is put to use. In the distance, the Lord's manner stands solid and impressive, unchanged by the suffering occurring at its base. The contrast couldn't be more stark. Down here in the village, people are cold, hungry, sick, and exhausted. Up there in the manor, behind those thick stone walls, people are warm, well-fed, entertained, and comfortable. The inequality is literally built into the landscape. The manor elevated, fortified, dominant. The peasant huts low, vulnerable, insignificant. You take a deep breath of the cold morning air laden with smoke from dozens of cooking fires, the smell of human and animal waste from the streets, the musty odor of damp thatch and rotting organic matter. This is the smell of your world, the olfactory signature of the Dark Ages. It would make a modern person gag, but you barely notice it anymore. Your senses have adapted, or perhaps given up trying to process the constant assault of unpleasant stimuli. This is your world. This is your life. This is what every day looks like, sounds like, smells like, feels like, and you wouldn't last 24 hours. Conclusion: why you truly wouldn't survive. So, we've walked through a single day in the Dark Ages, from dawn to dawn, experiencing every brutal, uncomfortable, terrifying aspect of medieval peasant life. And if you're being honest with yourself, you know you wouldn't make it. Not even close. It's not just one thing that would break you. It's everything, all at once, with no relief and no hope for improvement. Let's be very specific about why a modern person would fail catastrophically in this environment. Physical reasons you'd fail. Your body isn't adapted to this level of sustained physical labor. Even people who work out regularly in modern gyms aren't prepared for the kind of brutal, unrelenting agricultural work that medieval peasants did every single day. Your muscles would tear from overuse. Your joints would inflame from repetitive stress. Your back would give out within the first week from constant bending. Modern people simply don't have the physical conditioning for this level of exertion, and you can't build that conditioning quickly enough to survive. The inadequate nutrition would devastate you rapidly. Your body is accustomed to 2,000 calories per day with balanced macronutrients, proteins, fats, carbohydrates, plus vitamins and minerals. Suddenly dropping to 1,200 to 1,500 calories per day, mostly from grain, while doing hard physical labor would cause rapid weight loss, muscle wasting, and system-wide shutdown. Your body would start cannibalizing itself. First fat reserves, then muscle tissue, eventually even organ tissue, trying to keep vital systems functioning. The diseases would kill you swiftly. Your immune system, despite being generally robust by medieval standards, has never encountered the specific medieval pathogens. You have no immunity to the particular strains of plague, typhus, dysentery, influenza, tuberculosis, and countless other diseases that circulate freely in medieval populations. You'd likely contract something serious within days of arrival, and without modern medicine, even treatable infections become death sentences. The parasites would make you constantly, miserably sick. Your body has never dealt with intestinal worms, lice infestations, flea bites, and the incredible bacterial load of medieval squalor. The chronic parasitic infections would cause anemia, malnutrition, and make you vulnerable to secondary infections. You'd be constantly ill, weakening progressively. Psychological reasons you'd break. The complete absence of hope would destroy your mental health within days. Modern people are raised with core beliefs about progress, improvement, and personal agency. We believe that hard work pays off, that tomorrow can be better than today, that we have some control over our lives. All of that is completely false in the Dark Ages. Tomorrow will be exactly like today, and nothing you do will change that fundamental reality. This psychological shift from hope to hopelessness would be absolutely crushing. The social isolation would drive you to despair. You can't communicate effectively with anyone due to the language barrier. Old English sounds nothing like modern English. You might recognize occasional words, but sustained conversation would be impossible. You're completely alone in a crowd of people, unable to express yourself, unable to understand what others are saying, unable to form meaningful connections. The lack of mental stimulation would make you feel like you're losing your mind. Modern people are accustomed to constant information, entertainment, learning, and intellectual engagement. Medieval peasants have none of that. Life is just work, prayer, eating, and sleep. No books. You can't read anyway. And books don't exist for peasants. No music except simple folk songs. No art. No intellectual conversation. No learning. Nothing but endless, mind-numbing repetition of the same tasks, day after day. The constant, overwhelming fear would exhaust you mentally. Fear of starvation, fear of disease, fear of the Lord's punishment, fear of bandits, fear of supernatural threats, fear of dying from a minor injury, fear of eternal damnation. Medieval life is lived in a state of perpetual anxiety that modern people, even those with anxiety disorders, can barely comprehend. Every aspect of life contains genuine danger, and you have no control over most of it. Social reasons, you'd be helpless. You have no skills that matter in medieval society. Your modern knowledge is completely useless. You can't fix a plow, harvest grain efficiently with a sickle, thresh wheat, operate a hand mill, preserve food without refrigeration, or navigate medieval social hierarchies. Everything you know, your education, your job skills, your cultural knowledge, has zero value. You're incompetent by medieval standards, and incompetent people don't survive. You have no social capital whatsoever. Medieval society runs on personal relationships, family connections, reputation, and community standing. You have none of these. You're an outsider with no ties, no support network, no way to establish yourself. No one owes you anything. No one will help you out of charity. They can't afford to. They're barely surviving themselves. You're alone in every sense that matters. You fundamentally can't accept the social hierarchy. Modern people have internalized ideas about human equality, individual rights, personal freedom, and social mobility. Medieval people accept that society is hierarchical by divine design. Some people are born to rule, others to serve, and that's God's plan. You constantly chafe against your bound status, making yourself miserable and possibly getting